Good morning, everyone, and happy Thursday, the 10th of December 2020. Flexibility in horses. That's today's topic, flexibility. Hypermobility, flexibility, and often the confusing and conflicting situation that some clients find themselves in when they have problems which are conflicting the observation that I have, which is that their horses do have quite a long, large and mobile range of mobility. Flexibility in horses. That's today's topic, flexibility. Hypermobility, flexibility, and often the confusing and conflicting situation that some clients find themselves in when they have problems which are conflicting the observation that I have, which is that their horses do have quite a long, large and mobile range of mobility, effectively. And I would classify them as being quite flexible horses and hypermobile horses. And this often in many situations, usually the situations where the horse is very mobile, and I'm seeing it for the first time. So there's a greater incidence of mobility and range of mobility is quite profound. Usually this comes as a much greater surprise in those situations when the clients are actually told that the horse has quite a large range of mobility. And the reason this comes into play is the fact that in many cases where a horse is hypermobile, they have excessive mobility, they're actually lacking postural stability through their movement. And when they are moving, when they are carrying a rider, the extra weight of a rider, when they're asked to do specific movements, they are lacking that integral postural stability that provides them the support throughout the movement and actually creates the capacity for efficient movement and actually generates power and strength. And obviously stability, like I said, in the movement. So in these situations where the horses are very flexible, you usually find in many cases if they haven't quite had the exact preparation they need or they're having a few issues, the owners do tend to report that the horses are, they have a tendency to be very potentially reluctant to turn one direction or another. They have flexion issues. They might have issues with collection. And a lot of these things come into play, particularly when the horse is traveling at a greater speed as well. So in its canter, it might be heavy in hand. And in many of these cases, it's reported as the horse as being quite stiff and it actually feels very reluctant to flex. And it doesn't lift through the back. So yeah, in those situations when I'm actually giving this information to clients, it can be quite conflicting and confusing for them because it's such a contrast what they're actually expecting to hear and what they've perceived as is the situation there. The problem is though, is when clients are working with that information, when riders, when trainers, when handlers are working with that information of a horse that is hypermobile, but they're actually experiencing the movement and experiencing the horse's response as being quite inflexible and quite stiff, it's because there is a present state of inflexibility and instability within the horse's mobility, within its articulating joints, within its structure. So the problem with that is the horse then supports this and provides what it needs to support its structure, which isn't stability and mobility, but it's actually coming from a place of postural tension. When you get postural tension that has been existing for a long period of time, you do start to get these symptomatic profiles of the horse being quite inflexible in its movement, heavy on the forehand, hard to turn, hard to get off the leg, and riders do report that as being the horse is quite stiff and inflexible, basically. So when we've got these two situations, it can be confusing as a trainer and as a handler that, I have a horse that is, or the trainer and the rider has a horse that is inflexible, yet here I'm being told by a manual therapist or another professional that my horse is actually quite flexible. So what we need to do in those situations is basically approach that postural tension from the basis of why it's occurring. Does the horse have an asymmetry in its movement? Is it deloading? Is it holding compensatory tension profiles to basically support the limbs and support the movement through, through travel. Effectively, every time your horse is moving, it's having to push off the ground. It's having a period of flight to a degree with one aspect of its physiology, and it's actually landing from that, so it's experiencing a gravitational force on that as well. And if we add a rider on top, we're adding a little bit more of a gravitational force to other areas of the body, namely the key structural building part of its physiology, which is its spine. So tension's going to creep in. If the horse hasn't got the strength to stabilize itself, if it hasn't got the strength to support existing asymmetries, existing pathologies, issues with its musculoskeletal frame, discomfort, it's going to lead down that path quite rapidly into postural tension. Problems arise chronically, of course, if this continues to be the state of play, because the horse effectively is moving in a state of poor suspension. When you have tension, when you're quite fixed, you don't have the capacity to self-protect articulating surfaces and soft tissue. So tension results in fragility and brittleness, and that's not something that we really, really want to be in a situation with large, athletic, tightly structured, but very elastic animals. So, the approach in all cases where you've got a basis of the horse is basically creating postural tension through its body, which is presenting symptomatically as stiffness and inability to be flexible. Yet the horse does actually, on non-weight bearing, non-rider carrying, standing range of mobility checks, have quite a good range of mobility. The always end result of that is, one, work out why the horse is actually doing that. If there is any existing asymmetries, if there's any existing lamenesses or areas of inflammation or concern or guarding pain response, hypersensitivity, you've got to assess those. You've got to find out why the horse is doing that. Secondarily, making sure it's comfortable on its feet effectively. It's actually able to load the ground and push off correctly. But I would say in most cases, there is a resistance if the horse is actually quite mobile and yet it's under saddle quite, there's obviously something which is putting pressure on the situation to cause that postural tension to come so profoundly into the picture. And then lastly from that, of course, once we've got those windows of movement open again, the horse is able to actually use its full range of mobility. Then we need to build up that stability through dynamic movement, slowly, carefully, and systematically, to basically provide that horse that structure it needs, that stability it needs through the movement. And probably the biggest one that comes into play with clients is when they have a horse which is very mobile, but it's very stiff in the hand, its head's raised, it's hollow through the back, it's not turning, it's not flexing into the corners. In many of those situations, what we're actually looking at is the fact that the horse has got poor suspension capacity through the hindquarter. And this is a very classic situation where the horse is actually incredibly mobile, but it isn't able to support through suspension, through collection, through transference of weight, its actual structure, to allow its, abdominal and axial spine supports to actually do the job that they need to do. And then this translates through to the rider, up to the front end, and then effectively you get a bilateral tension through that cervical spine and that neck tissue, which stops us being able to flex them and basically put that neck where we want it to be. So yeah, it's that phenomenon when you have a phenomenon when you have a horse that is very flexible and has quite a good range of mobility, yet at the same time symptomatically the rider and the trainer and the handlers are reporting a quite reduced range of mobility. It's quite interesting, that contrast between the two. And ultimately what it is it's presenting a protection profile and a compensatory profile from a basis of postural tension. The outcome, we need to find out why that's happening, we need to open those windows, and we need to provide strength development and stability development through lots of different approaches, from proprioception through to just simplistic muscle strength as well. Food for thought. Chat to you next time.